Okay, Jen.
Okay. Hi everyone, welcome to GeogChat 2 live. I'm hoping you've all on the right link now because we think we had a little technical issue before, but hopefully we're here now, and I will pass you over to Tom to start us off with a bit of a welcome to our Wednesday night CPD.
Perfect, thanks Jen, and thanks to Paul as well. You guys do a wonderful job running GeogChat. I was absolutely delighted to be asked to offer a really short introduction to this evening's GeogChatLive 2 with the theme going for a How I Teach. The greatest thing about being involved in GeogChat is it just feels like the world's biggest geography department. So I'm sure you've all seen the speaker lineup and you've seen everything. It's just going to be an amazing variety of topics this evening. And we're always looking for people that are wanting to talk about geography. I've hosted a few guest posts and bits and pieces through the Team Geography blog that you can find on Twitter, and I'm sure we'll be tweeting about it this evening. I'll be encouraging all the speakers to be writing up and sharing their wonderful presentations and posts this evening. So it's an absolute privilege to be involved. I can't wait to hear the amazing contributions tonight, all about how we teach our wonderful subject. So I'm going to hand back over. I don't know who's up first. I'm sure whoever it is will ably step in and this will run as smoothly as you like. I'll hand over.
As smooth as the proverbial baby's bottom there, Tom, maybe? Yes. I'll just share the screen here. And this is the one here. And do the inevitable, are you seeing my screen question? So, good evening, everyone. It is absolutely my pleasure to kick things off tonight, coming all the way from County Antrim, sharing the first of our How I Teach tonight, which is how I teach the global distribution of earthquakes, in particular, how we add value to map work through GIS. Now, talking of which, can I wish you a happy GIS day? By good fortune, today is actually GIS day, which gives me a chance to share the cringiest of sad dad jokes, but if this doesn't go down well in this audience, it'll never go down well in any audience at all. Can I wish you a happy GIS day, the mappiest day of the year? Sorry, let's move swiftly on, shall we? Right, we're going to start with taking a look at what is normally in my books with my GCSE students to describe the distribution of earthquakes. And I'm going to suggest that there are a few limitations with this map, and then we'll go on to take a look at as much as I possibly can in my time available of how GIS can add value to this as we describe the global distributions. So I'm going to suggest that one of the issues with this map is that it only shows the location of the epicenters, not the magnitudes of the earthquakes, and the GIS map will pick up on how you can get around that issue and that problem. Secondly, you can't correlate the map to any other factors such as the location of plate margins. You and I, of course, will know that these correspond to plate margins, but our pupils may not have developed the knowledge schema just yet to make that comparison easily and readily. Next up, the data is frozen in time. It is embarrassing that when I actually looked carefully at the time for this map dates from 1978 to 1987. There could well be some of you joining that weren't even born in that period of time. Anyway, moving swiftly on. Part of the challenge of them not showing the magnitude here is that these earthquakes in North America and USA, you can't tell if the same size of earthquakes are distributed all across the country. I thought that earthquakes were concentrated in California, that kind of thing. And then finally, there's no scale, or the scale is fixed. You can't zoom in. If there's something that catches your attention, interesting anomalies, you can't go and explore them any further. Now, there's nothing wrong in a sense with using a map like this. You can certainly get good geography from it. But what I want to do now is to show you how you can go beyond that to really try and get some added value with your GIS map. Okay, so here we go. This is the GIS map presented in a similar form to the one that you've just looked at. It's showing the locations of the earthquakes and it's showing the background there. Now, first thing we can do is to turn on a layer of the imagery, which already enriches that map quite considerably. But what about the magnitudes? Well, you can go in here to this layer, and if you go into this change style icon, you can see that all of the data that's contained in this map is available for you to select. So I can go in here and change this to the magnitude. Now, whenever I'm doing this, I set this up as a task for my students to be able to do. And I set this as something that gives them control of being able to navigate their way around it. So what it allows them to do is to really get to grips with the data visualization and look at different ways that you can maybe visualize this data and really make the patterns stand out. Maybe these circles are overlapping a little bit here, so they can live adjust the size of the circles to make sure that the large earthquakes are standing out a little bit more. If you wanted to, you could have a very interesting conversation with them about how you would represent the data that has a big range, but a low mean and a concentration towards the bottom, all sorts of things like that. Click OK, done, and there you go. You've got that map already enriched from the map that we started off with. But of course, we want to be able to add on extra layers because this is a GIS map. So you can get them to look at the relationship between the location of the plate boundaries and the earthquakes themselves. This is the overall relationship. And if they're struggling to see, they can change the transparency of that. And again, whenever you give them control of this, they are in control of being able to use all of these things. So that already, I think, is worth adding a little bit more value, but that's really only scratching the surface, because you can go in and have a much more detailed look. Go into South America, for instance, I get them to have a look at that. This one corresponds quite nicely to that simple pattern of the majority of the earthquakes being on or near the plate margins. Up into North America, if you remember the original map that I showed you, showed earthquakes all across the United States of America. I thought earthquakes were meant to be concentrated in Earthquake County in California. What can we do to try and explore that a little bit further? So we can go in and use a filter. Remember, every point in here has data with it. So we can go to the magnitude. The magnitude is greater than, and let's say we set a magnitude of 5. We can apply the filter, and it will just plot on those earthquakes that have a magnitude greater than 5. And what you can do is get them to compare and contrast that to see if you change that filter, does it change the pattern? And one of the things then that I get the students to do in the task that I set them is to do exactly that. This is some of my students' work, where they're able to go in and do a detailed description, a comparison of those two maps side by side. And then you can go a little bit further, because that's a very interesting overview of the global pattern for a year's worth of earthquakes. But what about if we take a look at one day in the life of our planet in terms of earthquakes? How many earthquakes occur on the planet Earth typically in 1 year? You can turn that on, and there you have the layers of the different earthquakes. Now, if maybe you're struggling to see that a little bit with that map, you can change the base map again. But I'm going to keep this one at imagery, because what we want to do is come in and have a real explore here of Alaska, give them a little bit of an overview of where Alaska is. We can talk about the context here. You can turn on the legend, and this is a converging margin, but we can go in even closer. Now, this is dating from October just this year, so you may well be aware that there was a rather large earthquake occurred in Alaska just in October. It was a magnitude 7.6. Now, that is a big quake, isn't it? And yet the story behind this is, and you can come back in and give them this information, that there was very little impact in terms of human life. There was a tsunami warning. People were evacuating. They certainly felt the shaking, but there were no fatalities and deaths. Now, how does a 7.6 not lead to such major impacts? And this is where you can start to do some really interesting exploration with them. Because if you click in any one of those dots, you'll see you've got the magnitude there, but you've also got depth. And you go in here, you can see that the depths of these earthquakes are sitting in around about 30 kilometers deep. Now, how deep is 30 kilometers? Well, they'll not have much of a sense of that. So why don't we go down that same day to California? Why don't we click on there and find out that the depths of the earthquakes there are only 7.37? And then I was able to set up for them a table where they were able to go in and look at a series of the Alaskan earthquakes and the Californian earthquakes and look at the depth and look at the depth. So which location had deeper focuses? And it really allowed us to compare different types of plate margins, with a destructive plate margin with a subduction zone and a conservative plate margin where the plates are moving alongside each other. And you're really going in there and exploring that in tremendous detail. But with these tasks, then what I love to do is to finish off with a really open-ended question with them that really allows the pupil pupils to build up to an opportunity to show their own knowledge and understanding. Why did such a large earthquake cause damage and no deaths or injuries? Now, they've been guided up until this point. I have a video produced to help them, but then I encourage them just to go in and explore this content, go in and have a look, at some of the information here. So let's turn on a layer for Alaska towns. Where are the towns? If we zoom out, we can have a look and get a sense of the population density of this area. This is a low population density area. There are not that many people living there. But because you're in charge of scale, you can zoom right in to any one of those settlements. 870 people living in the settlement, but we can zoom in, if my Wi-Fi will allow it, and have a look at exactly the nature of that settlement. That's what it looks like. And how far away is it? Well, again, we can just zoom out and we can use the measure tool here to click on there and get a sense of, right, you're nearly 100 kilometers away. So this is a deep earthquake occurring off sea, well away from any major inhabited locations. So the opportunities there for the students really go in and explore that are very, very significant and very, very profound. So I'm going to leave the final word here to one of my students who said this about his experience. You're able to go and make your answers unique, he said. Now, I'll share this presentation when we're done. This is Cohen's answer, and I must say I was more than a little bit blown away by it. Of course, this being GIS Day, the mappiest day of the year, I've got to finish by sharing the resources that I've just demoed to you. Here we have all the resources, the slides, including the VAR, the video assistant resource to guide them through, and the map that is there. So that's how I teach global distribution of earthquakes with GIS. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alistair. I feel every time I watch you speak, I'm just amazed and feel like a child in a classroom. So I really need to get better at this. Okay, next up, it is Joseph Milton.
Oh, right. So mine is, let's see if I can share my screen. So mine is very much moving on from the high tech of Alistair's to the low tech of sand dunes. And the reason why I've picked this is because I've been a teacher for 14 years now. And in the 14 years that I've been teaching, from Avery Hill, right at the start of my teaching career to now, I've always needed to teach sand dunes. And for the vast majority of the time that I've been teaching it, I've mainly been the human geography teacher at A level, so I haven't really engaged with the sand dunes as much as maybe as I could have done. And that's changed in the last couple of years. So I'm just going to talk through what I do now differently. Before I do that, I'll talk through what I used to do. Is basically display this image, which is one that you can readily find online, and talk through basically what happens from the sea and the strand line to the climax vegetation at the end. And that was it. And talk through how the vegetation changed, how the acidity changed, but really it was surface level. And the problem with that is that the students generally came away with a reasonable understanding of how the sand dunes change, so they can name the different stages of the sand dune and the succession of the sand dune. But beyond that, it was surface learning. They didn't really know much about what changed within the sand dune through time. And ultimately that had a big impact on the field work that we done later on. So for NEAs, in A level, we needed to effectively reteach it again. And the biggest thing that we found was they understood how a sand dune looks, but they didn't understand a lot of how it moved out towards the sea. You got the seaward accretion as well. So how I decided to change it was by drawing, and I like drawing. And my blog has a lot of drawings on it. And I thought, how could I demonstrate the seaward accretion and the build up of the sand dune through time? And as with all my teaching things that I've shared on my blog, I use a textbook, or I use a student book, so I can then see how it would look on the page. And I use my visualizer and think about how I would do each stage and how I would draw it from each different sand dune, from the strand line right at the top all the way through to the woodland at the bottom. and for each one, drawing what happens with each stage. So how it changes in terms of the dune, what the characteristics of the dune changes, how the water table changes, how the vegetation changes, the pH, the soil content, the moisture content, and going through each and every single one. But it also allows not only for you to see the dune changing through time, but it also allows you to see that actually the sand dune accretes outwards to the sea as well, which is the thing that really was lacking as well. So what we've generally found with doing this now is that specifically at A level, the students have a really in-depth understanding of sand dunes. And granted, none of them are doing sand dunes this year for their NEAs because we haven't been able to go to a sand dune. But in the last couple of years, we've had some really, really good bits of coursework that have went really in depth into different characteristics of a sand dune through time and how they've changed. And I feel it's just as a result of really explaining things more and going stage by stage and breaking it down into the single stages and how they move through time and talking it through and taking a lesson to do it as well, rather than just having it as an activity at the start of the lesson. And it's allowed it to really be demonstrated to them and understood. So just bringing a bit of GIS into this at the end, I also use some maps at the end as well. So I think this was shared by Jason Saul this week, which is wayback imagery that you can find online that you can drag and drop. And you can see the comparisons through time of different places. So this is a sand dune up in Northumberland at Druridge Bay that we can look at the changes through time, and you can see how it moves out to sea. And then what you can also do as well is just to show a bit further back in time, is these wonderful National Library of Scotland side-by-side maps where you can see further out to sea as well. So I did have my cursor on this, but you can't really see it as well. So I put an arrow on to show where the sand dune was at the turn of the 20th century and where it is now, again, to demonstrate how the sand dune is moving out to sea and having that seaward accretion as well. So ultimately, what I've done with mine is I've drawn it effectively and explained it as well at the same time. Now, what I will be doing as well is I will be doing a blog on this at some point with a few others as well. And yeah, that's my sand dunes and how I've moved from just having one diagram to lots of diagrams and explaining it using a visualizer.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. I always am amazed by people who can actually draw. I am not one of those people. Right, next up, we are on Abdurrahman Perez.
Hi, guys. I think I'm going to follow on the same vein with Joseph in terms of being quite low tech. Mine is very much diagrams on the board and definitely not as high tech as Alistair was a second ago. So I'm going to be going through how I teach the multiply effect. The multiply effect crops up, quite a lot throughout Key Stage 3, certainly Key Stage 4 AQA, and also bits and pieces at Key Stage 5. However, it doesn't appear on the specification for AQA by name. Just to be clear on definitions, by multiply effect, I mean the snowballing of economic activity. So whereby the introduction of a new industry or the expansion of an existing industry in an area also encourages growth, right? And we all know all about it, but the idea is to get students to not only think about it the one time and understand it the one time, but be able to link to it as much as possible. Because as you can see in the second bullet point here, there is a lot of our specs and the learning in geography to which we can link the multiply effect. And it really is one of those key concepts, which is if the student understands, unlocks so many things. So for example, how tourism can help to reduce the development gap, other strategies to reduce the development gap, like investment in industrial development, and all sorts of bits of changing economic world and the challenge of urban issues at AQA. Like I said, it's not mentioned on the spec, but you can see here at the bottom 2 images from a mark scheme where it is mentioned by name. So it's one of those funny things with AQA that it's not mentioned, but they still do want it. And also, it just happens to be one of my favorite things to teach as well. And the way I do it is how many things in geography are taught, is through a good old-fashioned diagram. So there's the diagram, the visualizer, and I'll talk about stories in a moment. I think the visualizer is the easiest way to do it. I'll agree with Joseph in what we were saying before with sand dunes, that having your own exercise book, which I have for all of my classes, and just drawing along and explaining things to students is one of the easiest ways to do it. Admittedly, on the last slide, you saw I was doing it on the whiteboard, and I do that sometimes from time to time, depending on what the class is like. I think it's also helpful to give students information. I think in a minute, I'll speak about how you want them to do at the very least, 95% of the thinking. And to do that, and with them being novices,
you do have to help them out a little bit. So here I've taken a clip from a report from Dangote Cement, who I'll talk about in a second, and I could give that to students potentially. And on the right hand side is a clipping from a textbook. And these could all be collated onto an A3 sheet in front of students at the start of the lesson. And it could be said something along the lines of, we're going to draw a diagram together as a class, but I need your help. And then they'll be able to pick bits and pieces. And the other bit is about stories. I think, especially after having read the book, How to Explain Absolutely Anything to Absolutely Anyone by Andy Sarby, that stories are really powerful in terms of teaching students about anything. Stories stick in the mind. I'm sure we can all remember stories from our childhoods or from school, which still stick in our minds. There's something quite special about them. So here's the diagram. You don't need to sort of look at it too much now, but the ideas are there at the top. So whilst drawing, I will talk pupils through the links. I find that there's no point of linking anything. You can see there are a hell of a lot of arrows here, potentially quite scary to a younger or maybe a less able student. So you do need to talk through them. There is no point of drawing an arrow and students not knowing why it's there. Ask as many questions as you possibly can. So if anything, you are asking more questions than you are making statements, right? That's the way I think about it. And they should be doing at least 95% of the thinking, if not, 98, 99, or almost all of it. The way that the diagram works means that they need to know certain things. They need to know what disposable income is. They should have some sort of idea what that is, what quality of life is and what determines it or what affects it. Generally speaking, how tax works and how the government can spend it and how the government collect it. And then also the main job sectors, as in primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. So you can have a look at this slide when I share the resources later, but it's fairly simple. You'll notice a similarity between this and the one on this screenshotted tweet here, because they're the exact same. I've just made it nice and neat for you guys here. And the important thing here is that students know how this diagram works. I've spoken to students about this in the past, and I've reminded them, do you remember that day when we drew that really scary looking diagram? And it's only because I talked to them so much and we'd asked so many questions that they'd actually understood. And then there's also the stories, right? The mini examples and the analogies. So I'll just give 2 examples here. I actually much prefer the term vignettes, which I picked up in my second year of university in relation to methods for human geography. A vignette is a brief, evocative description, account, or episode. And I use them all the time, but especially in a lesson like this. I use one example that's personal to them. So my school is based in Putney, and I'll talk about that example in a second here. You can see that in the image here. And then I talk about an example that's personal to me. You'll be able to read up on this example after when I share the slides, but the idea is that they know about this Pret on Putney High Street, they know about the Costa, and they know about the Caffè Nero, whether or not they've been around in the area since 2008. And the fact that I can explain and say to them, look, the moral of the story here is the multiply effect happens everywhere, or can happen everywhere, and it's not just in far-flung places like Nigeria. And also the idea that it doesn't happen overnight. I think students really struggle with timescales, even if it's something like the formation of headlands and bays, but also something like this. They need to understand that what I've just shown here in this diagram doesn't happen in 24 hours. Geography is just not that simple. And then this final bit here, I think one of the most important things is here, as with many concepts in geography, is how often we come back to it. Here are just 5 snippets from the specification or where the multiply effect is relevant. By the end of year 11, my students have heard multiply effects a lot, basically, to the extent where they are probably bored of it by the end. And I just think to myself, can you somehow shoehorn in the multiply effect? Yes, great, go ahead and reap the rewards of them understanding not only the bits of the spec more, but also the term. And with no, I think, yes, you can. So you need to go back to the drawing board. And that's it from me. Thanks, everyone.
Fab, thank you very much. The multiply effect is one of my favourite things to teach as well. Right, moving on to Jenny Brownlee now, who's going to talk about how she teaches population.
Here. Ooh. Let's just get this up. Oh, what's going on? So population is something that we have been looking at in particular this year. The reasons why is that our key stage 4, has recently changed from a 3-year to a 2-year key stage 4. So we were trying to think of ways, how can we bring in population to the younger years into our 7, 8 and 9 now without repeating the GCSE structure, so that when they get to that key stage 4, they have the ideas and they have the vocabulary that they've got. A lot of this in particular has come from what was found on Twitter and ideas and things that people have shared. So a lot of things were not original ideas, but it's just ways that we've now managed to use them to relate to population. So it began by looking at what population is. So as with lots of keywords that we use in the department, we look at the Freire model so that the pupils have a really deep understanding of what we mean by the word population. It's something that they can hear in loads of different subjects, but might not necessarily always understand what the word means. We have books in school at the moment that have all keywords that kids need in it for their definition. So they're able to use that definition as much as possible. And we can then spend a lot more time looking at the characteristics, the examples and the non-examples, so that they've got a really deep understanding of this, so that not only can they just kind of tell you what it means, but they can actually explain the term as well. So we spend a lot of time at the beginning of the first lesson of population going into the actual meaning of the word and what we can use it to, particularly within geography and the different parts of the subjects and different topics that they look at. We then go on to think about, okay, now we know what population means, how can we then think about what population actually is? So first of all, we look at how it can change over time. We introduced the idea of life expectancy quite early on with year 7, however, not as a measure of development. We just mention it simply as something that we can use to see how long people live for in each country. We then come back to it later on when we're thinking about development, kind of HICs, LICs and NEEs. But the first time that our pupils were introduced to it, it purely is just a measure of how long people live for. In particular, the image that's there is from the Gapminder website, and we spend a lot of time actually taking this apart and seeing how over time the income and life expectancy link together and how that then leads to the changes in the life expectancy and the population, so the size of the bubbles that we can see. Once again, we've kind of built this base, we then move on to think about our population pyramids. The first time the kids are introduced to it, it's just a simple kind of bog standard LIC population pyramid, like the top example that they're given. We talk through each section, we pick up kind of what is the birth rate, what's the death rate, what can we tell from it, how does it change, and we begin to think about why might this actually happen. By building this into year 7, when we then come to look at China in year 8, they already have this understanding of what a population pyramid is, and a bit more, we can then spend a bit more time looking at actually why does this happen in relation to China. So rather than having to build on that knowledge, we can look at it in a bit more finer detail relating to the actual city and the actual countries that we are looking at. Once we've then got the idea of population, we begin to think about urbanization. So then within this topic, they're split up into 2 completely separate things. We have the idea of population at the beginning and the number of people in the country, how that impacts the population pyramids. And then we then move on to think about the urbanization and how it can lead to megacities. But once we've got an idea of where these megacities are and why they've happened, we then strip that away again and look at the population within certain cities. So we then go right back and look at, okay, here's the population of Mumbai. What's life like for this population? How has that population changed? Before then, again, building on the idea of urbanization into particular case studies. This is just a bit of an example of kind of how the work that we've looked at. So we spend a bit of time looking at, before we go into China in year 8, in year 7, we look at loads of different countries' population pyramids, the changes that we can see, and then it's just a bit of people's work there and showing that actually they were just given it and they were given some time just to completely take it apart. Yes, they made mistakes because it was the first time that they saw these population pyramids, but they were able to kind of work together and take them apart so that they could see the mistakes that they've got and they could fix the mistakes as well. Like the first one about the birth rate, they could then fix that themselves and identify, actually, no, wait a minute, that's not correct. This is what we mean by this part of population. This is the features that we can see. This then goes on to, as I mentioned, we then look at population in different cities. So Mumbai is the one that we particularly look at in year 7. And we think about, okay, here's the population of Mumbai. What's the population like in the Diwali slum that's there? What's the population like that's in the richer, the more affluent areas that's there? So once we have the population of Mumbai, we go into it in a lot more detail. So we think about this before then comparing it to the rural areas, and then thinking about, of course, why people then move to the urban areas and what are the differences like in these populations, and not just taking it all as one. This is an urban population in Mumbai, this is all the same. We take it apart into different sections before kind of essentially building it then back together and looking at how this works. We finish off at the end, before we go into a lot more detail in the urbanization section, but we just give this pupil, this quick fishbone diagram that they've got about 10-15 minutes to try and complete just as retrieval. So starting off thinking about at the beginning of their first lesson, we looked at what population is. We then thought about, okay, what is a population pyramid? Again, just giving them a bit of time to think back, retrieve, and then they can work together to fill in any information that they've got. Before, on the bottom half of the fishbone, it's then a lot of the more detailed stuff that we've had looked at. How can migration then affect it? Thinking of the particular case studies that we may have mentioned before we then go into a bit more detail. Again, what are the differences in the populations we've seen in the rural areas that we've looked at? How are these populations in terms of the size and the age structure? How are they different to the populations that we've seen in urban areas? What we've found so far this year, because it's the first year that we've tried it in a lot more detail with our year 7s, is that it's actually built up and it's creating us this really good base for us to go on into a lot more detail, and they're able to use a lot of the vocabulary that we would expect them then to be able to kind of remember and reuse again in GCSE. So far, it's been really popular, and it's been something that the pupils have managed to engage really well with, and hopefully now we'll be able to see the rewards of it when we come to look at these pupils again further up the school. So that is population. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you, Jenny. Okay, next up is Rachel Robinson.
Rachel, you're still muted.
Sorry. I'm going to talk about how I teach colonialism and development. So kind of giving you a bit of a whistle-stop tour through kind of the different things that we look at. So we start off, and we actually teach development in year 9, and we start off by thinking about uneven causes of development, and then go on to look at how colonialism is a cause of uneven development. And we look at 2 examples in this unit of India and Haiti. When we do this, we introduce kind of these 2 countries, and we use this video from Shashi Tharoor, who wrote Inglorious Empire, to unpick some of the experiences of colonial rule in India, thinking about the impact on language, education, culture, bringing in ideas on the impact of LGBT communities, where kind of laws were put in place that kind of erased some of that culture as well. And then we also use this video from Vox, thinking about how Haiti's independence actually resulted in huge debt and economic sanctions. So this introduces it to the students in a nice way. We then get the students to do a learn one, teach one task, where they use these sheets to then think about how colonialism had an impact on the country and its population then, but importantly, how these actions had a lasting legacy on levels of development. Now, it's good because in year 8, the students would have already learned about empire and slavery in history, so they can build upon what they already know to apply it to geography as well. After they've done this lesson, we get them to write an answer or an essay about how whether reparations should be paid to all colonised countries. Again, this is building on what they've already done in year 8. They write a really similar essay based on kind of the historical impacts, but then they bring in their new knowledge from geography. So we've got a comparison about how kind of those things link together. We get them to do a reading again to remind them of what reparations are. So the idea that countries get money for the impacts of colonialism. And if you're interested in these ideas, Gominda Bambra is a professor at Sussex University, and a link to her website is there, but there's loads of public writing, and her academic articles are brilliant in kind of exploring some of these ideas. That's just an example of some essays. So they kind of pose some ideas about whether they think it should be. They use evidence to support that, and there were some really good answers. We also think about neocolonialism in our development module in Year 9. And I'm aware that these images are very provocative. We kind of unpick that and make sure that students are aware of like the depiction of people in these images are problematic in themselves. We talk about kind of how neocolonialism is new colonialism, and the idea of kind of trade and aid as an examples of systems that are continuing to oppress different countries and populations around the world. Within this unit as well, we talk about Mansa Musa, and he was the wealthiest person who's ever lived in the world. So we kind of pose the idea of Jeff, like who is the wealthiest now, and they all come up with Jeff Bezos and Amazon. But we then pose the question, why is the place that the richest man to ever lived is now one of the poorest countries in the world today? Because I think we often or kind of teach students it's to do with climate or being landlocked and other things, but actually this gets them to question why this area kind of previously was much richer. So it brings in some ideas there. We then kind of revisit this, so we thread it through to another topic in Year 9 on tectonics. And I've spoken about this before, but just the idea of using Haiti as a way to kind of talk about the impact of colonialism and the kind of legacy that continues. So this is a really good article from The Guardian that kind of explores some of the history. And within this as well, there's an opportunity to talk about neocolonialism, depending on the class that you have and whether they're able to kind of explore this maturely, but kind of introducing the idea of Oxfam sexual exploitation scandal and how NGOs are having kind of a negative impact today. And you can also draw on kind of what they might have learned about in history, about exploitation of slaves and sexual exploitation of slaves as well. So that is a nice kind of bringing those things together. This is a fact sheet we use, and I think it's just really important. You know, we talk about Haiti being really bad, the earthquake rate being really bad because of the high rates of poverty, but exploring why they have high rates of poverty is equally as important, I think. We then do a unit about Africa. It's not called Africa, and I'm aware of kind of the issues of doing a unit on the whole of Africa because it's so varied, and we do explore that, but it's easier just to write Africa. I really like these couple of slides from Miss I Lava Geography, but I think it's really important that we talk about the history of African countries beyond just colonialism and setting it into context and not giving kind of a victim narrative. And here you can also kind of bring in the ideas of Mansa Musa again. And then we kind of revisit. So we get them to think about where they've learned about colonialism before. And by this point, they would have learned it in history, also in PBE and earlier in the year in geography. So their kind of prior knowledge is really important here, and they can build upon it. We look at kind of the Berlin conference, and we think about how Africa was divided up, the scramble for Africa, and why this was problematic, focusing on colonialism in the Congo as an example, and we explore these ideas in a lesson. We also use cartoons. I think there's some really good cartoons, particularly by this artist, I think it's Pollitt, thinking about kind of exploitation and getting them to draw out the meanings of these cartoons as we teach this. Moving on from kind of Year 9, we've kind of cemented some really good foundations of understanding, which means when we're time bound at GCSE, when we look at big case studies like Nigeria, they're able to kind of use their prior knowledge. And although we don't have much time, they're able to apply all of this to some of the issues that we study. Now in the Almighty Dollar, on page 81 and 89, the ones on the board, it does explore some of the issues. So kind of the colonial legacies holding on, and also the idea of neocolonialism and kind of China's impact there as well. Finally, A-level, there's just kind of so much to look at. And I think, again, if you've got a really good foundation at Key Stage 3 and then into GCSE, these can be discussed with confidence by the students. You know, you can talk about it within migration, the World Bank and the WTO and kind of international organizations, and then within superpowers as well. So I think kind of giving them this prior knowledge is really powerful so they can put things into context properly when they get to A-level. So that is how I teach colonialism and development. I'm just going to do a tiny little plug here. So there is a Decolonizing Geography WhatsApp group. There are now over 100 members, and it's just amazing. And there's always kind of people chatting, posting links. There's kind of Google Drive link with everyone uploading resources, and there's a few projects going on. So if anyone is interested, then please get in touch with me and I can add you to the group. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. That was brilliant. Okay. Quickly now on to Paul Turner.
Hello, good evening, everyone. So a couple of weeks ago, I presented at the IGS Teach Meet, and the topic I was talking about there was about teaching the Anthropocene. So the idea that we live in the age of humans, and that has to, the severity and the importance of that, or the significance of it, it needs to have a knock-on impact in our classrooms. So I thought today I would talk about how I teach the planetary emergency. And so what I've got is trying to take these sort of more abstract ideas of how I think we need to change the way that we teach, or how we think we need to change the way that we teach, actually give you some sort of specific examples. So I've got 4 ideas. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. This here was the cover slide of the presentation I gave before, and what those 3 sentences summarize what I'm trying to get across. This idea that the science is clear, we face an unprecedented global emergency, and we must teach for the Anthropocene. So the scale and significance of this means it has a knock-on impact on the way that we teach, or it should do. Okay, so I'm just going to show you a couple of websites now as well, just to highlight some of this. So to begin with here, this first one, this might have passed you by, but back in November of 2019, a group of 11,000 scientists published a letter to the International Journal of Bioscience that was also copied into lots of big newspapers internationally. And the headline of this says, "World Scientists Warning of a Climate Emergency." And there is just the first paragraph that I was keen to read to you. It says, "Scientists have a moral obligation to clearly warn humanity of any catastrophic threat and to tell it like it is. On the basis of this obligation and the graphical indicators presented below, we declare, with more than 11,000 scientists' signatories from around the world, clearly and unequivocally that planet Earth is facing a climate emergency." So these are not extreme people on the fringes of society. These are your everyday scientists. And I also think that we could quite easily change that scientists to teachers. And there is a moral obligation with teachers in terms of preparing students for the future and equipping them with skills and knowledge and all those sorts of things. And so, you know, some of this should be ringing true in terms of our thinking. So, I mean, I'll show you these. These are things, again, that are really people see very frequently. We all know as geography teachers, carbon dioxide, methane, all of these sorts of things that are increasing. And this is the illustration of the kind of impacts of this climate emergency. And so just to reiterate that point, there was only a month ago, there was this article that was released in The Guardian that said, "World leaders pledged to halt Earth's destruction ahead of UN summit." And it had leaders of some of the wealthiest countries in the world, 60 countries promising. And let me just read again. It says here so these leaders from 5 continents warn that humanity is in a state of planetary emergency due to the climate crisis and the rampant destruction of life-sustaining ecosystems. Now, again, these are words of world leaders. These are not crazy people on the fringes of society. And what I am kind of posing is that language you use in the classroom? And should it not be that we are? And that's something I'm going to question in a second. So here are my 4 ideas, or the 4 key concepts within this, kind of how I teach the planetary emergency. So the first one is thinking, actually, this is not something that we should isolate within its own topic, and that you tick a box and say, I've done that topic. We did that back in, I don't know, year 7. It's something that needs to be in every topic and also almost every lesson. So what I thought I would do is Geog.3, a textbook that maybe forms the foundation of a lot of people's Key Stage 3. We're looking at the contents and the ideas it has within it. You can see something like teaching from rock to soil. There's lots of opportunity within that to look at the fast and slow, or the different types of carbon cycle, which you can then link to this planetary emergency. You've got things like living off Earth's resources. Again, there's so much opportunity to emphasize the planetary emergency. So every topic. The next one then is language. So what I would like to propose is that words like probable and possible and future, we kind of wrap up and throw away, because we need to be talking about this as the impacts now. So to remove that sense of, oh, it's something in the future, it genuinely is something that we're seeing the impacts of now. And again, let me just show you one other. Sorry, let me just find. Here it is. Okay. Another news article that was saying our planet is in crisis, but until we call it a crisis, no one will listen. And so the way that we communicate it and the language that we use is really fundamental. And this article talks about Senator Kamala Harris, who was asked about climate change in a Democratic debate in June. And she said, look, I'm not going to mince my words. I don't even call it climate change. I call it the climate crisis. And similarly, there are lots of other phrases. So increasingly now, scientists are not calling it global warming, but we call it global heating, talking about things like the climate crisis and the ecological emergency, or the climate emergency. Again, the BBC and The Guardian have released sort of reports to say, this is how we're going to change our language and how all of our journalists should be kind of phrasing this. So it's important that we use the most appropriate language. And I think if we rely on things like textbooks or exam syllabuses, you know, we're out of date in a sense that the language of this has evolved, and that's all linked to this idea of how we respond to it. Okay, the next one then is thinking about images and the imagery we use, because obviously the imagery is really powerful. Now, my presumption and from experience, I think that a lot of teachers use very abstract images of flooded landscapes or forests on fire. And what I'm going to sort of suggest is actually we should be using far more faces, and we need to give a personal face, a kind of a personal context to this. So someone I wanted to suggest that I've used in the past is an artist called Gideon Mendel, who has a really long series of photography projects. And one of them is called the Submerged Portraits. And he has gone around the world and visited communities that have experienced flooding. And he's taken them in a way that really emphasizes the humanity and the personal aspect of this. And so I think they're really strong images that you could use. And actually, what's really interesting is they're completely sort of varied places around the world. So you've got very traditional places that you might think of as flooded, but then you've also got other sort of European countries. Also, we've got places, you know, in South America and in Southeast Asia as well. So faces and giving it a personal kind of aspect. And then the last thing that I wanted to emphasize as well was that often the examples we use, and I think this is true in terms of what Rachel was saying as well, we can use examples that sort of appeal in the sense that they're quite extreme. And yes, there are certain places around the world where, you know, like the Arctic, you know, that lends itself in terms of looking at impacts from climate change. But the only way that this really comes home and sort of people feel some sort of visceral response to is if we emphasize the impacts now on communities and where we live. And so, you know, what you need to do as teachers is to then incorporate ways that climate change is impacting your students now, be it on maybe the availability of food or food prices or flooding. You know, if you're in a school in Somerset, you know, you are within your rights to link that flood event with climate change, and there is plenty of evidence from the Met Office that links these sort of one-off weather events with longer-term climate change, and talks about how that impacts the intensity and severity of those sorts of events. So I just wanted to reiterate then at the end my 4 points: every topic, language, images, and examples. So thank you.
Thanks, Paul. That was brilliant as always. And finally, last but no means least, Andy Funnell, please.
Jen, thanks very much. Hope you can hear me okay. Now, before I start this, I must say, I'm just going to share my desktop a second. Bear with me. Before I start this, I need to say very, very clearly that I am not planted here by Google. I'm not been sent here by Google at all to sell a product. I'm just here to sell an idea. So what I've been trying to do recently is trying to teach case studies using Google Earth. So I know some of you, probably all of you, know what Google Earth is, but I'm not sure what level of experience, what level of usage you have out of it. So I'm just going to share a few ideas with you in the short space of time that I have. So here it is, beautiful Earth and things like that. And what we are, to teach a case study, what I've been using is this button here, which is projects. Now, if you have a Google account, then you can all of these projects down the left-hand side. So what I've been doing over time is just building some case studies. So I'll just show you the Bangladesh, I'll just show you this one here. And the reason I wanted to show you this urban transect of Belfast is because we are, in the current times we're in, we're struggling to do a bit of field work. We're struggling to get our wellies on, struggling to go outside and show our students some of the things in the real world. So this is a virtual field trip of Belfast, which we would normally take our students to do. So it's just stored in Google Earth now, and I can just quickly access it when I go to lessons. So the first thing we do, obviously, is I've got my urban transect here. So I was able to draw a line on the map for Belfast, and then color code the different points. So you can see it's got a bit of a key on the left-hand side, CBD red, industrial zone white, etc. And then it's just a case of, I can do this in front of the students in the classroom. I can do this as a homework activity. Students can do this in the computer room, anything like that, and get some information. There's various ways you can teach using a Google Earth project. So first thing we'd do is we'd have a look, we'd zoom in, and I love the way it zooms in. Google Earth is really good to render, but you can see here, depending on the computer you have, you can see here we've got some quite powerful imagery already, so students can get some good information about the CBD. And then it's just a case of moving through the transects. So I can just click through these different options down here. I'm going to jump to the industrial zone, so Google Earth will do it for me. You can see there's that blue line, there's that transect that I've drawn on. So students can follow this line, they can jump back, they can jump forward. So now they can start to see some brownfield sites, a bit of extra space to develop on, etc. I'm going to move a bit further on to the inner city and suburbs. Now, this is one of the best findings I saw on the Belfast transect. So I'm going to jump to the boundary. I was able to find the boundary between the inner city and the suburbs. And if you look at that, I think that's a very, very powerful image there of, there's some inner city housing, the terrace housing there, and then you're just bordering into the suburbs there. You can see some more trees, back gardens, driveways, off-street parking, etc. So again, the transects that we can't go and see normally, Google Earth gives us this possibility and this opportunity really to fly about a city, to fly about an urban area and have a look at the different zones all the way out to the rural urban fringe. So if I zoom out to the rural urban fringe now, you'll see right at the end of the transect, there you go, you can see some developments on the rural urban fringe. Just a bit further around actually on this case study, there's actually more housing developments and things like that, but you can clearly see, and students can clearly see the boundary, and they can start to comment on the different sort of housing, the different style of the streets, everything like that. So that's one way that you can use Google Earth. It's not necessarily a case study. It could be a case study, but it could also be used for virtual fieldwork as well. I'm just going to jump to my PowerPoint just because it takes a bit of time to render, and I'm just conscious that it'll slow things down a little bit. Another case study is Bangladesh flooding. So this is the start of the Bangladesh project that I made, starting in the Tibetan Plateau. So you can start to see where the various tributaries come from. Moving a bit further down the transect or down the line, down the case study, students can start to see how the rivers start to feed into each other at confluences. The rivers start to get wider, things like that. And again, I've turned the view so it starts to go further downhill. And I think this is great. You can get various shots in Google Earth, which I think really do highlight some of the things you see in a textbook. And one of the good things about Google Earth projects is that you can insert images, media, videos, any case study booklets that you've produced in the past. You can just get the data and the detail and just put it down the right-hand side so students can view it. So I've just taken a copy of the long profile of a river, stuck it on the right-hand side, and then this image here in Google Earth asks students to look at the drainage basin of Bangladesh. Can they see the long profile of the various rivers? And I hope you'll agree with me, this is quite a powerful image. And the students themselves, if they've got access to the computer, if they're commanding this program in a computer room, for example, or for homework, they can zoom in and start to see the differences, look at the change in gradient, the width of the river and things like that.
Andy, I'm very sorry to cut in front of you here. It's maybe just me, but I'm still just seeing the Google Earth project of Belfast. So just in case that's the same for everybody, you seem to be referring to great images, and I don't know, does somebody else want to confirm?
No, I was just about to say the same thing. I was literally waiting for you to stop speaking, Andy. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, apologies.
I just don't think it went to share your screen. I don't think it went to the PowerPoint.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for letting me know.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. I was kind of waiting for the right point.
No, you're all right. It's me waffling on. Let me just try a new share. Maybe this one works.
It's still the same. I wonder if, yep, it's working now.
Okay, magic. Thank you. Brilliant. So just to quickly jump back, sorry, I was waffling on there about the Bangladesh case study. So as you can see, there's some imagery there of the source of the river in the drainage basin of Bangladesh. Moving through, you can start to see how through this project the tributaries start to meet at confluences, and then this is the long profile that I was talking about. So in Google Earth projects, you can add all of your data, imagery, detail things to the right hand side and ask the students to have a look at these images here. So that's what I was talking about a few minutes ago, and I think it's a very, very powerful way of seeing the long profile of rivers and getting the students to have a bit of power into zooming into various locations, etc. And this is just part of the project where I've zoomed in to Dhaka, the capital, and I've asked, and on the right hand side it talks to the students a little bit about what hard engineering is, and you can even drop the little Google man into anywhere that highlights blue, and I'll show you a little bit about that later on, but you can drop a little Google man into various parts of Google Maps and you can actually have a look at the photographs there. So getting students to jump into Dhaka and having a look at these flood walls and maybe evaluating it and considering how effective they'd be, how sustainable they are, do they work, and more importantly, how do they affect an urban area of Bangladesh. Another project that's been produced is the Wholeness Coast. So you can see here, this is Milton, which we all know very, very well. So I've highlighted the key coastal road there in red, and then we've got the coastline. This is just one part of the project. So you can see Milton there. There's the rock groins. But if I flip the view in Google Earth, I think students can see quite clearly there how effective the groins are. But when the hard engineering stops, look at what happens to the rate of erosion here. And then we can start to ask students either in front of the board or on their own computers, their own devices, what about the farmer that owns this field? What's the conflict there? What's the support that this farmer is getting from the council? So there's many questions you can ask from these very powerful images. And there's another example there. One of my favorite case studies is Rio De Janeiro. I love teaching this for favelas and shanty towns. So there's the famous Copacabana beach. But if you zoom around a little bit around Rio de Janeiro, there's the people as the asphalt that they call. So there's the developed urban area, the high-rise buildings, the gentrification, tourism, etc., with a bit of detail on the side there. But zooming around a little bit, you can see one of these. So there are 750 of them in Rio de Janeiro. Again, students can zoom in, they can have a look, they can start to try and find where the biggest favela is, and then start to comment on the differences in the housing between that and the high-rise buildings of the CBD. And this is Rocinha, the biggest favela in Rio de Janeiro. And with Google Earth projects, you can also get students to measure distance and measure area. So here, this is just an example of me having a go at measuring the area whilst in the Google project of this slum here. You can flip the view, so there's the 2D view of it, so you can quickly change the view, and there you can see that a lot of favelas in Rio de Janeiro are built on hillsides, the unwanted areas of land by the CBD because of the risk of landslides and all that. But people who want to live in the slums, the 750 favelas, there's an opportunity to build a slum on the hillside, very close to the CBD, and students can start to get an idea of how these slums are built, what they're like, what the location of them is, and also describe the features of them as well. And that's another shot where I've dropped the Google man into the favela. So someone's been very, very brave and actually gone into this favela and taken some pictures, and you can walk around the streets and then start to get a bit more detail as well. I love this. This is at the back of Rocinha favela, so you can start to see, if you zoom around a little bit, students, this is found by one of my year 11 students, and he actually stuck his hand up in class and said, Mr. Fennell, look at the disparity here. And I nearly had a heart attack. So you can see the disparity in wealth, and you can just get it from the type of the buildings, the swimming pools over here from the more affluent people, and then the edge of the favela with the high density housing. That's just a bit of a snapshot. I do apologise for the mistake bit earlier on, but there's a bit more of this. I've just created a mini site, mini blog, earthcasestudies.wordpress.com, and there's 3 key sections in it. Making a Google Earth case study. We've got some ready-made voyages, and have a play and get the dopamine hit, I like to call it, where a lot of students, when they first go to Google Earth, they try and find their house. So there's a bit of information on that website, on that mini blog, of how to make a Google Earth. It gives you a step-by-step guide on how to make a case study for the River Nile. And then you've got these ready-made voyages. And the final thing I just wanted to show you very, very quickly. I know I've just stopped sharing my screen. I just wanted to show you a website, if you don't mind. It should be this one here. In Google Earth, there's a button here that you can see. It's called Voyager. And if you click on that button there, before you start making a Google Earth case study, you might want to try and click on this button. This is one of the examples, and this is something made by Google Earth. And this is all of the major tsunamis that happened around the world in history. And they've added this layer to Google Earth, and you can start to see the power and the actual magnitude of the tsunami. And all of these white dots here signify the magnitude of the wave height. So you can see the Japan tsunami in 2011, and you can see how far the wave went, which is fantastic. I click back a slide and it jumps to the tsunami in 2004. I know it'll take a bit of time to render, and there you go. You can see another layer there of the Boxing Day tsunami, and you can see how powerful it was. But if you go to Ready-Made Voyages, and as part of my mini site, the blog, it shows you some of my favorite ones in there. There's some great Google Earth views, tsunamis in history. Alistair, I know you like your volcanoes. You can stand on the side of Vesuvius and have a look in. And then Paul, I know for climate change and climate emergencies, Google have made some fantastic layers. So here's a good layer of what could happen to Manhattan if it was to flood due to climate change. So all of my favorite ones are listed in this blog here. And as I say, all you need to do is just go to this website, earthcasestudies.wordpress.com. And that's me. Thank you very much. And that's how I teach case studies with Google Earth.
Thanks, Andy. That's absolutely brilliant. I feel like I want to go do that tomorrow now with my classes. Yeah, and really cool that you've got some step-by-step information on the blog too, so brilliant. So that's it from us all tonight. We'll be back next Wednesday with a regular Jog Chat, and I'd just like to say a big thank you to everyone who's presented today, to Paul, to Tom, and to everybody else in